Hi, and today we're going to do another short video. So for this one we're going to deploy OpenStack and Contrail SDN into AWS. If you think about that too hard, it doesn't make a great deal of sense. You're deploying what is a cloud, OpenStack, into a public cloud, which is AWS. So it's a cloud in a cloud. It can still be very useful for demos, quick tests, workshops. It's not something you're going to do in production. So when you deploy an OpenStack public cloud into AWS, you end up with virtual machines in virtual machines, because you end up with OpenStack instances inside AWS EC2 instances. Each has its own hypervisor. So that's referred to as nested. So the performance for nested is appalling. In addition, AWS don't support the nested CPU flags. In fact, they do on very large metal instances, M5 metal for example. Possibly C5 metal would support VMX flags, but these instances are about 10 times the going rate. So in addition to the performance hit that we take on nested, we're also going to set our OpenStack deployment to use QEMU emulation. So it's going to emulate the CPU rather than use hardware and CPU flags for nesting. This way we can keep our instances small and light. It doesn't cost much to deploy. The price you're going to pay is it's really only any good for small instances, quick test, see how it goes. Nothing you could take forward into a production account. So as usual, I have a wiki. There's no need to take notes. I'll be giving you a QR code to this wiki, the stacks and all the details at the end of the video. For this wiki, as usual, you need to be logged into your AWS account. We're going to deploy this stack into Ireland. It has been written to be able to be deployed into any other region, so you can always go ahead and try that, but here I'll be using Ireland. You're going to need an SSH key pair installed into your region. The default is Contrail key, but you can call it what you like and change it in the parameters. You might be prompted the first time you use CentOS 7 in AWS to click a link and sign off from the T's and C's. It is a free instance, you just pay for uptime. You're going to need an account on the Juniper Docker registry, so hub.juniper.net, so talk to your Juniper SE or salesperson for that. This is because we're going to use Contrail Command to deploy OpenStack and Contrail integrated for us into AWS. So as usual, we're just going to click the link in order to deploy the stack. Click Next. So as I said, the default region is EU West 1, Ireland. Our command instance is an M4. We're using M5s for OpenStack, slightly higher performance, same price. So you need to fill in your Contrail registry password and username. Everything else can be left at default. I would entice you to change the user location. So this is the subnet that can connect to management, so the admin subnet. By default it'll be open to all internet. OpenStack's GUI is HTTP, so it's not a fantastically great idea to leave it open to everybody. So what you can do is put your /32 in there for just your console and then edit it in the security groups later on. So I'm just going to go ahead and populate my username and password, and then I'm going to click Next. So on the second screen you're going to see the stack deploy options. The one that I'd entice you to set perhaps the first time you deploy the stack is stack creation options, rollback on failure, disable it. And what this will do is if the stack fails, it won't just delete it automatically. Okay, then click Next. So these are our parameters and we're all ready to go. Click Create Stack. So this stack takes just a few minutes to deploy. Contrail Command will then take another few minutes after that. You're probably looking at about 6 or 7 minutes in total before you're going to see the GUI. So grab yourself a coffee and I'll see you back here in a moment. Welcome back. So our stack is deployed. We've given it a few additional minutes for Contrail Command to build and for the GUI to become available. As usual, the outputs show you how you can access the cluster. So at the moment, the only GUI that's configured is Contrail Command. We've yet to ask Contrail Command to deploy Contrail and OpenStack. So let's connect. log in as admin. The default password is Contrail123 unless you changed it in the stack. And now it's really just a case of following the wiki. So we're here. Initially it wants us to add a new credential so it can log into the instance and configure it for us. So this is the default password in the stack unless you changed it. Add credential. CentOS. The default password. Just so you can see it. Add. Now we're going to add a server, give it a name, any name you like. We're using static IPs, so unless you change them, this will be the IP given to All-in-One by AWS. And for this M5 instance, the interface name is ENS5. Credentials, it's the ones we just created, and create. Okay, now next, and it's going to ask us a few questions about how to configure the cluster. So give it a cluster name. Container registry is actually the default. It'll need the my user and password. Into Juniper's registry, you'll have to set yours. I'll do that at the end. So this is the Contrail version. Domain suffix, so this is going to be the domain for this region in AWS. Remember, we're using EU West 1. NTP, we're going to use AWS NTP service because it's already there and running. This is the gateway for the private subnet. I like to use MPLS over UDP because it's supported by all the public clouds. Okay, so we're here, click next. Oh yes, of course, so on this screen I needed to put in my registry username and password, so I'm going to do that and then return to the video. Okay, so I'm back. I clicked next and we're on to control nodes, and as it says in the wiki, just click the server and next. So there you go. That just tells us we want Contrail in our server. So for orchestrator nodes, the default is OpenStack, but we have a couple of parameters to set up to make an all-in-one possible. So the default's Queens, and that's the one we're going to deploy. Down in Cola globals, we're going to add 4 globals for the Cola Ansible deployer, just to make the deployment possible. And here they are. So this is variable 1. Do watch leading spaces here. You'll get a pretty obvious error if you have one, but it can be frustrating. It's the second variable. And the third, and the fourth. Okay, so HA proxy is no, because we're not doing HA. We don't want ironic in AWS, it makes no sense. We will have Swift, and we'll reserve 20 gig of disk space for that. And then just tell it which server to use. We've only got one server, so that's pretty obvious. Compute nodes, again, select the server, and as it says in the wiki, you're going to need to re-specify that default gateway for the subnet. This is the AWS gateway. And next, all the rest we can just skip past. We're not having service nodes, we're not having app formix, we're not having app formix flows today. We can just provision. So it's going to take about 25 minutes to deploy this cluster, and it'll completely configure Contrail and OpenStack for you, almost ready to go. So I'm going to stop the video and I will return when it's finished. So welcome back. As you can see, about 25 minutes in, provisioning cluster has finished successfully and it's asking us to log into the cluster. So let's log in, and you can see at the top this time it's selected the cluster ID, same login password, you know, the default's Contrail 123 unless you changed it. Yeah, as you can see, we've deployed a Contrail all-in-one. It has a view router, control node, analytics node, config node. It's a single server. And let's scoot back to the output of the stack. So all of these are going to work now. So this is the old tungsten fabric GUI, which I can take a look at next. Same password. There you go, everything's looking clean. And here's the OpenStack Horizon GUI. So I've mapped it to port 8146. Internally it's port 80, which is a very guessable port. Same login password unless you changed it. So if you're familiar with OpenStack, the temptation will be to dive straight in, but actually instances are not going to work yet. So remember what I mentioned earlier, AWS isn't offering nested in the CPU flags. So when you deploy a VM inside a VM, it will in fact fail. So we have a couple of post steps to look at in the wiki. So we're here, we've deployed successfully. And it says now change to use QEMU rather than KVM. So I've made this as easy as I can. So if we look at the stack output, it tells you how to connect. So this is our first all-in-one controller, port 1139. So I'm going to jump into the controller and I'm simply going to follow the wiki. It's a copy-paste job. So sudo bash, I'm doing pretty much everything as root. And this will modify nova.conf to tell it to use QEMU. And we'll need a reboot of the server. So it's going to kick me out. It doesn't take long to come back up, just a few minutes we'll be back in again. Okay, so we're back in, sudo bash again, back to the wiki. So at this point, we're up using QEMU. You could, if you're familiar with OpenStack, you can just go ahead and use the Horizon GUI at this point. I'm going to walk you through how to do an initial setup of the client, configure a network and a couple of test instances. But I said if OpenStack's your thing, you can stop the video at this point and you are done. So for building the client, there is a Docker inside Cola, which includes the tools, which seems to be broken right now. So I'm just going to install the client locally on the server. So I've done a sudo bash. I'm just going to enable OpenStack Queens repository. All of this is just copy paste. And this is going to install the OpenStack client directly on the host itself, which makes it quite a lot easier to work with, in all honesty. And now this is just really a straightforward setup. So the admin RC file is on the host already. So we're going to source it. That's going to give us a login to our project as admin. That file gets created for you, by the way. Let's go get a test instance. Generate a key. Oh yes, right, let's install the instance into OpenStack. Let's generate an SSH key. Although this instance actually has a backdoor. Let's put that key into OpenStack and let's create a test network. A test subnet. We'll do a second just so we have something to play around with. A flavor. Let's tell our security group, the default security group, that it's allowed to ping and SSH. And then let's fire up a couple of test instances. Okay, and if we do an OpenStack server list, we can see we've got 3 instances up. They're all active. They're just little Cirrus instances. You won't get much more than that in this QEMU setup. Still, that's good enough to deploy into Contrail. And of course, as with the other stacks we've shown you, those instances just got deployed into the SDN overlay. So this is this super scalable BGP MPLS network. And we'll see that over here. If I go down to networking, you'll see for my admin, I've got a couple of test networks and networking instances. There you go. So again, just going back to the wiki, I've given a backdoor for getting in to the instances directly on the host. There's a Docker that runs libvirt, and you can console straight into those. So here we go. This is a console into instance 1, and Cirrus politely tells you how to get in using user password. So I'm in. I've got my IP in overlay, so I can enable security groups policies to allow these instances to see each other or not see each other. Right now, I would imagine that I can already talk to the second instance. Yep, in this cluster. See, basically up and running. So you can see it wasn't much of an effort. Deploy a stack, click a few buttons and wait about 25 minutes and you're done. You've got an OpenStack set up to play with. So storage is very cheap in AWS. So if you just stop these, they're going to be costing next to nothing. So whilst they're up and running, a few dollars. Whilst they're switched off, it's pennies. So you can just shut them down, come back, pan them up, and you've got an OpenStack setup to play with and a Contrail setup to play with. And we're going to use this setup and some of the other OpenShift and Kubernetes setups to sort of run into more advanced use cases to do with federation and gateways and things like that. Anyway, that's the end of the video, and thanks for watching.